Doesn't matter. It's fine. It's fine.
Okay.
But
It's always fun trying to find
oh, it is. It takes some getting used to a little bit, I think. I don't know. I don't know. Who knows? Maybe.
There we are.
But here we are. Here we are.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, look at that. It's fine. Let's shut the stupid thing off. But anyway, so what's going on? What's happening? So we are back. Give it a second. I'll wake up. I slept long. I was so behind on hours though. I had to.
Oh, I know. I'm tired too. Okay.
Yeah.
Live chat. There we go. Okay. So morning, everybody who's on here, which is nobody yet. So
good morning, no one. Do you remember the time we first started doing this and you're like, there's no one here, but if you're on, say hello. You said something like that, which was
I know. And then Jay Price popped on and I'm like,
she was the first one. She was the very first one.
The other one was Allie Kay.
Right, but it was funny. That very first one was pretty interesting, you know.
Yeah.
All
right. Oh,
but no, that's cool. Oh, hey, but it's good. It's gonna be a great day today. It's gonna be a good day for shenanigans, Mary.
Yeah, it's so nice out right now too.
It was nice. It was nice to get out last night. Let's get a little boat cruise around the harbor last night. That was pretty exciting.
Cool. Yeah, I guess we haven't had. Last time we did a Facebook Live was.
It was a nighttime we did it, right?
Yeah, Wednesday. So it's been a little bit. So yeah, we've been kind of busy with stuff going on. So we haven't released a new episode in a while. But this week we will be releasing our episode on Cold Harbor, which is pretty cool.
Cold Harbor, Mary. We're going to talk in Cold Harbor, where U.S. Grant chose poorly. But we'll talk about that. There's a lot of cool things about that. It'll be fun.
Yeah. Good morning, Scott, and good morning, Barbara. Scott said that good morning, congrats to the Braves. Please don't ever change the name, i.e. the Guardians. I still call them Cleveland Indians. And it's like sometimes I forget, and sometimes I'm just like, I don't like that name at all. Like but you know what the difference is? What?
I have a ring that says Braves on it. You don't have anything that says it. No, thanks so much, Scott. I appreciate that. Yeah, that was a fun summer last summer, so we're gonna try to do it again. So the whole thing started again last night. So we ain't changed anything.
No, it's so funny. Like, and I know we're kind of off topic here, but I remember I talked to Indians fans here and there, Guardians fans, whatever you want to call it, and so many of them, like 99% of them, like, yeah, I don't like the name.
Yeah, no one likes the name. It's stupid. It doesn't matter. So, anyway, we'll get back to that. So, anyway, what's happening with you? It's been a good couple of weeks. We didn't do the episode this week because I had, speaking of Braves, I had a lot of baseball stuff this week, but we'll get back at it next week. And had to take a quick rundown of Washington, D.C. My presence was required in the national capital, Mary. Just don't want to brag, but I had to go to Washington. So that was exciting. And that was pretty cool too. So we'll have some fun stuff, get back on track again.
Ben says good. He's on vacation in Pitkin, Colorado. Some snow on the ground, snowed us yesterday. Good morning, Charles. And we were talking this morning just about, we got Cold Harbor coming up, and then that kind of will probably take another couple of weeks off, but then our episode for around the time of the anniversary of Gettysburg is going to be, shocker, about Oliver Otis Howard, but not to do with Gettysburg.
That'll be interesting to talk about him. And it's so funny because you were going on your social media. You made that, I don't know if it was on Facebook or Twitter.
It was on all three, but I basically said like, it's Gettysburg time, which means the Howard Sucks Brigade comes out. And I mean, it's probably going to be amped up this year because it's the 160th. And I know our friend MJ is doing a program this week in Gettysburg, and she was saying how she has to defend, she was defending Howard, and basically because people will come up to her and be like, Hancock saved the day, and I mean, Hancock's amazing, and that's MJ's general, but she still will say like, you know what, Howard was involved with this too.
No, but we said this a million times. You got to remember too, is people don't study like Howard. For you, nobody researches Howard like you do. And so in the lack of real deep dive or whatever, going into these rabbit holes, because who the hell studies Howard? No offense to him.
He doesn't really have that voice.
No, but right.
It's a lot of mythology too.
Is right. But so people will go into it and just assume the basics. And the biggest misconception, and you mentioned this is coming into Gettysburg season, is that Howard got routed with the 11th Corps at Gettysburg. And if you study Gettysburg, you'll know that he wasn't even in charge of the 11th when the battle happened, because he had to take over for Reynolds. And so Carl Schurz gets promoted up, and everyone gets promoted up, in that corps. And he's at the Fahnestock House. He's back trying to set up the defenses. with Steinway over there, ironically on Steinway Boulevard, Mary. Funny how that works out, huh? No, and so he's back at Cemetery Hill, wisely and astutely setting up that defense.
Yeah.
That is going to be the focal point on July 1st, July 2nd, and July 3rd. So Scherz is the one who screwed up a lot as far as, I don't even think he even screwed up though.
No, because you know what, like
if you read Jim Pula, and we talk about him a lot, right?
Yes.
He talks about guys like Gordon saying how it was the hardest they ever had to fight was against the 11th and Blockers Knoll and going through the town. If you're gonna find something to attack Scherz with, and this again is really, really having to dig deep, is not setting up a retreat plan because they all got lost on the street.
Yeah.
Trying to get back to Cemetery Hill. I mean, you stumbled back from Blue and Gray getting back. You know how tough it is to get back to that town.
Yeah.
But that's the whole thing is people assume that he was up there, at Blockers Knoll, and he had to run back, but Howard wasn't there. So you can have your fun with Howard at Chancellorsville, but if you're gonna go with the Gettysburg thing, it's just not really true. It's just not, and that's where you find yourself defending him a lot. I get that.
Yeah, and I mean, I'd like to think I'm very balanced, that I do say, like, yes, he made mistakes at Chancellorsville. Howard's biggest fault, which is what Carpenter says in his biography of him, is, that he didn't like to admit when he was wrong. And I mean, that's anybody. He's human after all, right? But I mean, the thing is like, so July the 1st, you're Howard, you find out you're in charge. That's probably a huge, oh shit moment. But then you're also Carl Schurz, and it's like, oh God, now I'm leading the 11th Corps. He's thrown into it, and not like nobody woke up that day and thought, well, I'm going to get shifted around here. He's suddenly thrown into basically managing, and he's not expecting that. And I think, yes, Schurz made mistakes, but Schurz is also, he's like anybody out there. He's having to think on the fly. He's having to think, okay, where am I going to do this? And they're spread really far out. Like where Schurz is, I think, is very far from where Barlow is. So Barlow is also having to take matters into his own hands too, and
he's not that far. He's close, but the problem is the intelligence, the communication
is not. That's what I mean. The communication.
Barlow moves up to a pretty good position because in his mind, you're fighting George Doles, you're fighting his Georgians. You have Edward O'Neill on top of the hill, and you're in the front, a good artillery spot. The whole thing with Wilkinson and the whole deal. You're firing on a good spot. But you don't know that Jubal Early is going to Savannah you, and right? Because he's coming down from where Camp Letterman is up that road, and that's the tough spot. And then they all get kind of screwed in. But that again, you can't blame Howard for that. How the hell could you blame him for that? No. But again, people do, and we have fun with it. And we were having fun with Hessel this morning because with his whole thing.
Responded and said like he deals with the same stuff with Sickles. It's like salients are bad, blah blah blah, and it's like yawn, and that's what and we've talked with Jim about that before too, just the whole, like, you have to defend some of these guys a lot more, than say like a Grant or a Sherman. Scott said, reading Carpenter's book now, he really centers on Howard learning from his early mistakes. Yeah, Carpenter's book on Howard is very balanced.
They all learn. This was a volunteer army. Yeah, he went to West Point and all that, but still you can study all you want, but once you're in the job, and some guys took to it better than others. Yeah. And a lot of them, you're talking about that shifting philosophy of that Jomini Clausewitz stuff they teach you at West Point to real battles that turn from Napoleonic battles into trench warfare. And it's not surprising the people, the Clayburns of the world, the Grants of the world, did better because they didn't have that training that was bad, that baggage that's holding them down. They were doing what they felt was right. Yeah. Howard was feeling his way through it. And he was, but again, if he was as bad as you'll hear while sitting at the mine on a Friday night, it's why would he have ended up going out west and doing what he did there? He wouldn't have been entrusted to that. And there are certain people who maybe historically didn't do as great, but their reputations are better. Guys like Blackjack Logan, who has his own circle in Washington, D.C., Logan Circle, right? But there's a lot of that. Howard gets blamed unfairly. I also think he had a lot of people. I think a lot of people thought he was kind of the goody two shoes of the army. Right. And so he's the preaching the Bible stuff and all that. And some people just don't want to hear it.
Well, especially the Germans, who are very much more free thinking than, say Howard.
Right.
Howard, I think his denomination was Presbyterian. And back then they were like kind of like a little bit of evangelicalism in there too.
And then if you're a Hancock and you see this and now you get Senate decides you're one of the 3 heroes of Gettysburg, you're like, God, you gotta be kidding me. And the kid who shines up the apple for the teacher, right? Now he's getting praise in his mind. It's maybe in his mind, he didn't do as well as he thought, which is probably more unrealistic than not unrealistic. But who knows? But that's what's interesting about it. And you talk to people, and if we talked to a guy yesterday, we went to a cemetery rededication here locally, and I don't think he didn't know Oliver Otis Howard from Ron Howard. And this is a guy who's a member of the Sons of the Union Veterans, and it's fun having those conversations. But it's fun though. But that's the thing is people get so personal. I see Ben mentions Texas Rangers. I used to go to the old Arlington Stadium, Ben, many times back when I was younger. Great. I missed that place. That was a cool place.
Good morning, Patrick. Good morning, Frank.
Good morning. But people talk to this stuff like they're football fans or baseball fans and they're defending their teams or something. Right.
Oh, yeah, exactly. And it's very, and the one thing that, I've learned is like, Howard's not the best. Of course he's not. But I find him a fascinating study because he doesn't have that voice in history. And he's a guy that, learn, what Scott said, Carpenter really focuses on the learning from the mistakes. I mean, he does not have a great day at Pickett's Mills, but neither does Sherman, neither does anybody. Nobody's going to have a good day at Pickett's Mills. And the other thing too, when we were talking to this guy yesterday at this dedication in Falmouth, was he mentioned Hooker. And he said, I don't like Hooker. And I said, I used to feel that way too. And I said, but if you look at the reorg of the Army after Burnside in January of 1863, Hooker makes that Army, turns it completely around, and he doesn't get the credit for that. And, talking to this guy about it, the guy was like, oh, I need to read more about Hooker. And it's really cool when you can get somebody thinking about it,
Yeah, no, that was pretty cool. I mean, again, we went to a thing yesterday in a cemetery on Cape Cod here. And what they were doing was kind of rededicating the cemetery monument they had. And it was a really, really well done thing. That we went into a chapel and they read the Gettysburg Address and they talked about some of the local Falmouth, Massachusetts residents who fought in the Civil War. And a lot of them are buried in this one specific area, and they resodded it. It's really pretty. They put up it's not a new monument, but they cleaned it. And they had a bagpipe guy and they had some people reading some stuff. There was one reenactor who read the vacant chair poem. So it was really, really good. And it was pouring rain. And then as soon as we went outside, it stopped. And then the best part for you, Mary, they had wine afterwards. So I didn't. And it was the good wine because it was in a box. So it was
decent wine. It was actually.
I know
good.
you.
I'm not a wine snob.
Oh, sure. Okay, sure.
Okay, yeah. I guess Ben says that I see Darren as a fellow ring knocker.
Oh yeah.
And Scott mentions that Howard's son was born in 1863, was named Chansey.
I didn't know you were a traveling man. You didn't say that before. Are you? Interesting.
Cool.
Yeah. Yep. Anyway, that's pretty cool. We ended up, speaking of that, we ended up going on our end of the season Falmouth Masonic boat cruise last night, Mary.
Yeah, that was cool.
With all of us people who don't exist, went on a boat.
Beautiful sunset.
A sunset ride all around the harbor of Falmouth by Martha's Vineyard. That was a good time. That was pretty cool.
Yep.
But that's I'm sorry. The ceremony was cool. It was very well done. There's a group that's and that's for Kathy Lee Bates. If you know the there's America the Beautiful. I think she wrote it. But she's buried there, and it's a nice area, nice cemetery. But it's good to
it was cool to get out and see that in person, see the history being talked about, and being able to talk to a couple people afterwards, about the Civil War and just having those conversations. It was really, really cool. Miranda mentions that Springfield, the Emancipation Proclamation signed by Lincoln, will be on display from June 19th to 23rd and June 26th to 30th. It's incredible to see in person. They're doing that for
that's pretty cool. That would be pretty cool.
That museum and library is it is amazing. It's so well done, and it's not all it's not like Lincoln worship. Admittedly, I like the Civil War section the best. It's very cool how they have it all put together.
Yeah, there's a lot of good museums, Civil War type stuff that's you get out there and find the stuff. It really, really is.
Yeah, like the one in Harrisburg is really awesome.
Oh, the one we went to with Lisa Sammy when she did her presentation.
That one was so good too. Richmond, that was really
at the old Museum of the Confederacy down there. Yeah. It's that was pretty cool. Because it's just very, very well done.
Yeah.
And so speaking of museum, we're going to be in September, Mary, right? We're going to be up. We got asked to go to the Blue and Gray Gala up to the American Civil War Museum in Harrisburg to do a part of a presentation thing they want us to do. So we're going to be doing
some trivia up there, but yeah, we're working out the details with them. So that'll be a lot of fun. Oh, and we got something in the mail too.
It is. Oh yeah. Okay. So
we were contacted by Simon and Schuster and asked if we would like an advance copy of a new biography coming out about Longstreet, which focuses more on his post-Civil War.
That's right here. So this book is coming out November 21, 2023, but it's a new book on James Longstreet. So we just got this in the mail yesterday, so we'll read it and see how it is. But
we're looking forward to reading that and probably posting a review on our website as well once we're done it. But
I don't want to judge. They can judge a book by its cover. It says Longstreet, the Confederate general who defied the South. So this is going to piss off the Lee people. So we'll have fun reading. We'll have fun reading this, but we'll see how that goes. I bet you Corey Farr's going to love that book based on that title. Yeah.
So Frank mentions he went to Chickamauga this past week and he felt an eerie feeling at Bragg's headquarters. I understand why he was one of the most disliked generals, right behind General engagement.
Yeah, Bragg's headquarters. That is because it's down that road. We have to walk back. Of course, when we went, it was pouring. You got to walk back, and it was all slush for us. But that's a negative
really
feeling place.
It's a negative, like really eerie feeling, like just oh god. But yeah, so that's cool. Frank went to Chickamauga, and he said he's challenging himself to study more about Bragg, reading his biography. And I didn't know he was friends with Sherman. Yeah, he and Sherman were friends. And the other friendship too, which kind of soured, was Beauregard and Sherman. Before the war, they were friends.
Yeah.
Well, Beauregard, as we call him, his son went to LSU, which was at that time the Louisiana State Seminary, which Sherman was the first head honcho there.
Yeah, it's funny looking at these pre and post war relationships. When we had Tom McMillan on, if you read his book that he did on Longstreet and Armistead and Hancock, you find out how close Harry Heath was with Hancock, and they were kind of wild men in the Mexican War. And Heath was Hancock's wingman. He was hoping to pick up the girls that Winnie Boy didn't want, and they talk about that. So, but the personal relationships with these guys is just fascinating.
The other one too, and I'm reading a Beauregard biography. That's what we call Beauregard on here.
Yeah.
And it's Napoleon and Gray. I think it's about 70 years old, but it's so good. It's very balanced, very well written. But he talks about some of the friendships that Beauregard had. And one of them was Robert Anderson. Mm-hmm. We were telling that guy about that yesterday. And then the other one was Joseph E. Johnston. They were really good friends too. And Davis hated that because Johnston was the type of commander, I guess, like he basically was kind of sitting back and letting Beauregard do his thing. And Davis hated that. Davis wanted him to have more of a kind of overlord over Beauregard. But then the one that Beauregard did not like was Albert Sidney Johnston. Beauregard couldn't stand them, which I found very interesting.
Oh, that's pretty cool.
And too, it's like, he does a good job explaining like the dynamics of Shiloh, how Johnston was kind of like, okay, Beauregard, like, what's your plan? And they worked it out together. But Beauregard takes a lot of blame for the Corinth thing. But, the biographer for Beauregard says, like, odds are Johnston might have fallen back there too. And they said, the other thing too, and we've talked about this before, is Beauregard, like, yes, he makes a mistake in assuming it's a victory, but he also does not have the intelligence to know what's happening on the Union side.
And you mean the knowledge, not the stupidity.
Yeah,
you know.
Well, like I mean, like the spy.
I know what you mean.
Yeah.
But again, that was a perfect storm for Beauregard, and he had a lot of bad luck too, because you had Lew Wallace get lost. Admittedly, he did.
Yeah.
But when you have actually, you know what's a good book to read on? I don't like the book because it's Shelby Foote's book on Shiloh, and I don't like it because it's just not a good book in my opinion, but it talks a lot about the Confederate reaction to hearing the sounds of the boats arriving when Ewell's guys made it, the Army of the Ohio in Pittsburgh Landing, and that, oh shit, we're in for it now. That feeling of that missed opportunity. And if you study Shiloh, you know how much weather impacted that.
Yeah, that's what the author Harry T. Williams really talks about, how he said like things could have been totally different if not for the weather, and that's really what slowed the men down.
It's literally what slowed him down.
Yeah, and Beauregard too. One of his faults, and Williams mentions this a lot, is Beauregard would procrastinate, he would get distracted, and he wouldn't send out orders on time. So he had his faults, and that's why like Williams' biography is very balanced. He does not like Bragg either. O'Brien mentioned, speaking of the friendship, Ryan's on here. He said Dick Ewell is very close to Phil Kearny and rescues Kearny before the gates at Churubusco when Kearny is shot in the arm.
Yeah.
Well, there's a lot of friendship. Like the friendships are just very fascinating. And like I said, like this Williams book it makes him Beauregard more human, because and obviously he is a human, but he's not just a commander.
Oh yeah,
he's this guy, and he really talks about the politics, about how Davis didn't like Beauregard because Beauregard would make suggestions. Like Beauregard suggested, "Hey, I think we need to invade Maryland," and Davis is like, "No, we don't."
Well, I mean, there's stories. If you speak of Gettysburg, that Beauregard was supposed to take an army up through Maryland, go to Pennsylvania, and it just never happened. There was all these plans, they fall apart. But you know what's so funny too, is I was thinking about Hancock, was of all the friendships in the Civil War, the one that is the most famous one is one that really didn't exist, and it's Armistead and Hancock. Yeah. I mean, they did to a point, but they didn't go to school together. They were out in California together. But if they came back to life today, if we had a Ouija board out, we got a little thing here, and if they read Killer Angels and saw Gettysburg, especially the movie, when I think they'd be mortified. I think they were colleagues. Yeah. But I don't think they were. And I know MJ, who's out in Gettysburg this weekend with doing her living history thing that she does. Gettysburg, These Honor Dead. Follow them on Facebook. Yeah. That's a great page there. But so it's funny, they could have gone. Even your boy Howard and Kearny. The whole situation after. Yeah,
they were like that.
They weren't buddies, but they were close enough to joke around about going glove shopping together.
Kearny says to him, "Don't worry, the ladies will still like you." And Howard's like,
"Yeah."
And then we can go glove shopping.
Yeah, and that's pretty cool,
Yeah, it's a really the friendships are really the dynamics and the friendships and how it factors into what's happening. And Beauregard is he kind of talks down to Albert Sidney Johnston all the time too. Basically implies, dude, you're an idiot. You need to and Johnston is just okay,
Beauregard was somebody you could just kind of tell. He was a learned guy, but at the same time, I think he gets a lot of unfair shit from Corinth. We were talking about this last night. Yeah. I think we were we?
Yeah,
I don't know. Yeah, okay. Yeah. I thought we were. Sometimes the rabbit doesn't fall asleep at the wheel there from Italy. Mm-hmm. But he, after Shiloh, he falls back to Corinth, and he realizes he's in a bad spot. So he sets up those Quaker logs, those trees that look like guns, and they retreat in the face of the enemy.
And they're running the train. But remember, they had the train, and they would have men cheering and all this other stuff.
And so he retreats back to save his army, and Davis loses his mind and fires him, and that's the end of that. And it began with Johnson dying. We did talk about last night, Mary. I remember. Pepperidge Farm remembers this one. Okay. We were talking about Albert Sidney Johnston, and maybe it's overrated, the impact he had. But I think because he's that great what if, what could have happened. And he might have been the greatest thing since canned beer. He might have sucked to, but you'll never know because he died. But the reason why people say that is because what came after. It was a revolving door of garbage in the Army of Tennessee.
Yeah, and Williams talks a lot about that, and he says I think his suspicions with it are the fact that Albert Sidney Johnston might have acted the same way that Beauregard did with Corinth, because like in Corinth, the guys all started getting sick because of the water. And Beauregard's like, we gotta fucking leave.
No, definitely. Oh, hey, MJ. We were just talking about you, MJ. We were talking about your Gettysburg doing Facebook Lives and the Gettysburg These Honored Dead. So follow her website, everybody. And I assume she'll be doing lives throughout the day. And she's in Gettysburg, so she'll make us all feel jealous because she's in Gettysburg and we're not. So anyway,
we're gonna be there soon.
And I did see she was the mine last night, Mary. She was shenanigans afoot at the mine off Steinware for old MJ. I can only for Major Cushman getting herself in trouble at the mine again. But anyway, it's good to see her on here. We'll see her here in a couple of weeks at the anniversary.
We will, yeah.
But I digress. What were we talking about?
We were talking about Albert Sidney Johnston.
Yeah. But no, his death again. But again, Beauregard, he did have we were talking about Shiloh. Was the problem with Shiloh was the Confederate armies all got intermingled when they were moving. So the regiments all got mixed up. So there was no real chain of commands. And even with that, those sheer numbers in surprising the Union Army.
Yeah.
Speaking of that, when I was in Washington, Mary, I saw Sherman's kepi that he wore at the Battle of Shiloh.
I've seen that before. That is really cool.
Get your damn men back to Ohio.
Yeah. Well, that was a huge error on his part. But I think like too, the thing with and Williams has these two maps in the book, and one of them is like what was supposed to happen at Shiloh and what did happen at Shiloh. And it looks great on paper. It looks, the plan looks, it's like, wow, they could have really done like bad stuff if the plan had actually worked. But then it shows like what actually happened. And it's like, going all over the place because everybody's mixed up. They have no control over it. The other one that did not like Beauregard was Braxton Bragg. And that's another reason why we have because of what Bragg wrote about him. Well,
you know what? I know our friend Jacob. I know he worships the altar Braxton Bragg, and then Braxton Bragg does some good things. But the thing about old Braxy though, speaking of Shiloh, I guess we're going to talk about Shiloh. Was when he's attacking that hornet's nest with our artillery, he does it piecemeal. That's the problem, and we've talked to many of these battles how. When you attack in piecemeal, you're going to weaken your effect.
Yeah.
And that's the thing about Bragg at Shiloh that the Braxton Bragg folks, which of course there's one, don't want to talk about. And that's the reality of it. But I like Bragg, I think he did some good things. I think
he's a great organizer with that. And he does, but he gets his biography is called The Most Hated Man in the Confederacy. And he doesn't.
Can you imagine? Someone writes a book about you saying you're the most hated something. It's just
I know. I was at Chickamauga a few years ago, and the people that were with me were looking at the books, and I just and like the one person's not really big in the Civil War, and they were like, "What the hell?" He points to the Braxton.
Well, it reminds me of that kid in school. This kid Jeff was a real prick in elementary school, and the teacher called him Bad Jeff.
So that's all you ever think of him.
And so if I see him in a bar somewhere, which I don't, I would say Bad Jeff. So he was like stigmatized at a young age. He was bad publicly. Bad Jeff, come on the chalkboard.
That's probably what happened to Bragg.
Can you imagine doing that today? You're a teacher. Anyway.
Bragg was probably Bad Braxy.
Oh yeah, he probably was, but I mean, he did do some good things. I'm sure for an MJ is going to say that with Cushman.
Cushman didn't like Bragg. Frank says #Team Braxton.
But the thing about it though is he still could have hanged her. He still could have, but he didn't.
He made the decision not to.
Whether she was, the idea of not executing somebody because they're sick doesn't make a lot of logic to me. So there's probably a reason why.
Yeah.
But again, that's the truth though. I'm sure she didn't like him, but I'm sure afterwards she's probably glad. Can you imagine if that was Nathan Bedford Forrest or somebody? Because he was there too. He probably would have shot her. Right then, because
they were friends. He was one of the ones that talked to her, I think.
Yeah, but but again, it's military order. She's a spy, or any of these people it could have been.
Well, too, Williams talks about Nathan Bedford Forrest's role in Shiloh and how he was going back and saying like, the union guys are coming up. We're going to get our asses kicked and nobody paid any attention to them.
Well, allegedly the last shot fired at the Battle of Shiloh was at Nathan Bedford Forrest. When he rode into the Union Army and had to spin around. And according to Shelby Foote, he turned around and, grabbed his horse, and who the hell knows? He grabbed a Union guy, threw him on the back to shield the bullets. That's probably Shelby Foote fangirling, Forrest like he does, but but that's the story. That's what he says anyway. So who the hell knows? But it's
MJ said that I guess Cushman threatened to shoot Forrest.
Oh yeah, no, yeah, that was a good when we had MJ on with talk about Cushman. That was a fun episode. That's one of our most popular ones,
It is, yeah. She was she does such a great job portraying Cushman and telling her story.
She's awesome. She's just awesome. But that's the thing though. That's what's funny about it is it's just some of these stories and how they all kind of come together.
Yeah. Well, they and Williams talks a lot about that. Like he gives his biography reminds me, Beauregard reminds me a lot of O'Connell's biography about Sherman. There's a lot of humor thrown into it. Like he refers to somebody as a dolt. This is awesome.
Dolt's a good one. That's a good insult.
I was like, wow, kudos to this guy.
I'm just waiting for that Pauline Cushman, Oliver Otis Howard expose smoking gun letter that exists. I know somewhere. The Danielle Steele story. The spy and the Christian general riding off in the sunset together. Who knows? But that's pretty fun. We have a lot of fun with that.
That's I don't know. It's like, I've read a lot of good books lately, and this one by Williams was one I found at school, because the academic library where I work they have a great Civil War book collection, but it's all older stuff. Like they've got Lew Wallace's memoirs, they've got Davis's letters, they've got Lee's letters, they've got different books about. There's one there about the Army of the Tennessee, which I want to read. It's an older book. And a lot of these older books, like some people think, oh, that's dated, but you read them and they still hold up. I find for some reason the scholarship back then, I don't know, like I find sometimes people take too much of a side, kind of like, Sears is great. His book on Gettysburg is great. So is Antietam, but he hates Howard and he hates Hooker, but he loves Reynolds.
That's why we say you read more than one book on a subject. And look, not everyone's going to read 3 different books on the Battle of friggin' Shiloh because they want to get an even feel. No, you read about it and get a good feel for it. But all the Gettysburg books, you could read. The difference between Coddington and Fonz is pretty substantial.
Yeah.
When you look at because every one of these authors has an agenda. In this Longstreet book here that we talked about, it's going to have a spin on it that Elizabeth Varron here, she's going to make the case. But again, they all do because they're all like you with Howard or with MJ with Cushman or with anybody. You're stating your opinion and you're backing it with facts, but it's still at the end of the day, it's your opinion. So
it's all in how you interpret the evidence behind it. And some stuff, it's like sometimes it's not about what is written, but what is not written, what is not said too. And I've been listening to the episode by our friends over at Battle of Gettysburg podcast, Eric and Jim. They had Carol Reardon on to talk about John Sedgwick.
I hear they have some great merchandise you can wear on tours. I heard. Speaking of that, I heard something about that, Mary. I'm just not gonna lie to you. I heard you can do that. But that's pretty cool. Go Third Maine, by the way.
Yep.
But anyway, so we'll have it's all about agendas. It's all about who you listen to and who you read, and that's the whole thing. Yeah. And that's why you're going to read so many different things, just because it gives you a much more worldly thing. But not everyone wants to. You're not going to read.
Sometimes you're going to read something that you don't agree with, but you have to look at why are they saying that? Why are they taking that slant? It's kind of like the one example we talk about a lot is McClellan at Antietam and Lost Order 191. If you only read Sears, you're going to have a very slanted, he's using a source that was debunked almost immediately after it came out. And that's why, there's that book that we're going to read hopefully soon, The Tale Untwisted, which really, talks about how McClellan didn't sit on Order 191 for 16 hours.
Anybody who studies the Maryland campaign, really, really studies it, and you really go into it. it's tough to come away with a real bad view of McClellan. And McClellan's polarizing. He's a lightning rod. I get it. I mean, he was a dick, and the Lincoln people. No, the Lincoln people hate him because of all the stuff that happened with later. But you got to remember too, he's taken over this broken army after Pope whipped it out and pissed all over it at Second Manassas. Okay. And he has to put that together. Lincoln has to go to bat for him to put him back in charge again.
Yeah.
He does. He's got to put that army, he's got to cobble it together again. Oh, by the way, Lee's going into Maryland now. And you want to talk about, you hear a lot about turning points of the Civil War, right? And I think Antietam is probably the biggest one. And there's a lot of big ones that you can point to, but Antietam, by McClellan going to Antietam and fighting for that, basically that draw, but stopping and pushing him off, people don't realize the shape of the Union Army at that point. Yeah. And the Confederate Army was on a heater. They were rolling.
Oh yeah.
And so Second Manassas, as much as Chancellorsville gets a lot of credit for the slam dunk, hammer nail victories, Second Manassas is about as close as you're going to get to an ass kicker. I mean, Pickett's Mill's another one no one talked about, but Second Manassas, Groveton, that whole,
it's bad.
But that's the whole thing too, is he's going to take that army. He's going to move into Maryland quickly. That's the ironic thing, is that the McClellan gets, ripped for being slow. But someone needs to explain to me why, if they waited 16 hours for 191 while the Battle of South Mountain happened within 12 hours after they got there.
Yeah, and that's because he's already got his army moving. And I mean, we're
but again, I'm right. And I am not a McClellan fanboy. I'm not. I don't care from one way or the other. I just think you got to be fair to the history. You got to be true to the history. And you could hate McClellan all you want, but at least acknowledge and just make sure you're reading. If you're just reading Sears then I think there's some other things you need to do. This McClellan book you talk about is probably the other way, and that's fine. Yeah. But the truth's going to be somewhere in the middle, right?
Yeah, exactly. You have to pick through and form your opinion from that. Like Ryan says, the Kearney people hate McClellan. And Sears talks about that too. There's a really funny story, I think, where McClellan wanted Kearney to do something, and Kearney was like, "No, not." Frank mentions that he's read several books on Franklin, and he's become more open-minded about Hood. So he understands how reading different aspects on a battle or just people is best. And he said, on a side note, I've been to Franklin several times, that half the staff recognize me.
Oh, that's pretty funny. But I mean, the thing with Hood, though, I mean, Breckinridge. I mean, there's a lot of people who are polarizing one way or the other. But when you read a lot of it, you'll find they're not as bad as you thought, or they're not as good as you thought. They're all kind of about the same. They all have good moments, all bad moments. Yeah. The real sacred cows have their bad moments quieted and embellish their good moments. Grant specifically, Jeb Stuart, TJ, all of them. Yeah. So even Lee, right?
Yeah, exactly. They all are like, and it's when you can't talk about their mistakes, or you start shifting the blame. Oh, well, this is because this person did that. That's when it's like, it becomes not a biography. It's more of this hero worship thing.
The ultimate hero worship by far is Robert E. Lee. There's no question. Oh, and there's a lot of, obviously Lee did a lot of good things for his army. You hear a lot about Gettysburg. You don't hear a lot about Spotsylvania. Spotsylvania, but to his credit though, is he was able to flip the narrative by the time they got to Cold Harbor. Spotsylvania, when you've got your generals, including A.P. friggin' Hill, who's sick all the time, telling you got to leave the guns with Ewell, and he takes them anyway, that could have been a game changer. He's sitting there with that full pucker effect moment where he thought, the whole thing was going to end, and they rallied. But then Grant screws up. It again, almost immediately. After North Anna, they're going to go to Cold Harbor, and which is a set of roads that meets at a tavern called Cold Harbor. And we talked about, it was called cold because they only served cold food, and it was a harbor because it was a safe harbor for travelers, right? Yeah. But there was no water. But you end up in a situation where you're going to be Grant now, and you're going to be told by guys like Hancock to attack. Because if you burst through there, you're going to get between Lee and Richmond. That's probably going to be it. the objective was Lee's army at that point. It wasn't on the city of Richmond, but that's what Lee thought. And if you break through there, you're probably done. But Lee had no reserves at that point, and that was a really good moment for him. And there was a lot, there was a lot of regimental commanders who openly said, if Grant told us to attack again, we were going to say no, we weren't doing it, because you lost 6,000 guys in 20 minutes at Cold Harbor.
Yeah, it's brutal fighting there. Looking forward to talking about that one next week. Charles says Confederates were firing on all cylinders in the summer of 62. Mike asks, have we read Pickett's Charge book by Philip Thomas Tucker? I was told it wasn't worth reading.
I don't know if I've read that one. I don't think so.
I think Carol Reardon's book is considered one of the best.
Carol's book is my favorite on Pickett's Charge because it's all soldier stories, diaries. It's not her opinion of what happened. Carol Reardon's brilliant. I mean, you talk to her and you want to jump off a bridge because she tells you these sad stories of these stories. But her book on Pickett's Charge is my personal favorite. I don't think I've read that one immediately. If I have it, I don't remember it. But I'll go with probably no, but I'll take his word for it. I'd like to check it out.
Yeah, Ryan says it's not really worth reading, and he said he prefers Glenn Tucker's works. So there's a lot of books, but yeah, even we had this discussion on our roundtable. Are there books that we haven't read that we've read that we haven't enjoyed? And
that was Barbara who asked that question, right?
Yeah, it was Barbara.
That was a great question. It was one of those ones I couldn't think of.
I was like, oh yeah, but I mean, I just said, Killing Lincoln by what's his face. Whatever, he writes all the Killing Whoever books, and that one was not good. But and there's books I've read that, I like Sears, but I don't like how he talks about Howard. And speaking of armies being tired and stuff, Williams talks about that in Shiloh, that one thing that is not considered with Beauregard pulling his men back that night of April the 5th was the fact that the men were tired.
Yeah.
And then the next day they were still tired too. But that's why Beauregard pulls them back, because they can't fight anymore. They've been at it since 4:30 in the morning. And Bragg's story about Shiloh changes so much to the point where it's basically, this is all Beauregard's fault for telling us to pull back. Meanwhile, Bragg was like, if I had managed to attack the Union, we would have won the battle, and all this other stuff. He really throws him under the bus.
There's a lot of bravado. There's a lot of chest beating. The whole war was a measuring contest for a lot of these guys. It really, I mean, you had old scores to settle. You mentioned Jubal Early and Armistead, the whole pie plate thing. A lot of these things go back. These feuds go back, and we talked. A.P. Hill, speaking of Antietam, his leaving Harper's Ferry. And so this is all personal reasons that these guys did what they did. That changed U.S. history.
It's really interesting when you look at it that way. And Barbara just mentions that you didn't like Shiloh's or Shelby Foote's book about Shiloh that much, right?
No, I didn't like it that much because I liked Stars in Their Courses. The book that he wrote on Gettysburg, he has that trilogy about that, which is pretty good. But that book, there's something about it. It was almost like a sad story of the Confederacy and he puts his opinion, he fills the gap with his opinion like most authors do. I just thought compared to his other stuff, I don't want to say it was lazy, but it kind of was. But I'd read it. Go ahead, Barbara, absolutely go ahead and read it. Because it is, you do learn about it, but it's almost like a novel, where the way he writes it is a little bit different. He has some stories about when Ewell's men arrived, which was interesting. It kind of puts you in the spot. But I don't know. I'll say it's a no from me. Son, Kyle says. But by no means. But don't listen to mine. Just read it because it's you'll learn a lot from it because it's always read everything. But I just didn't think about it like that.
Yeah.
Sorry, Shelby.
Yeah. Did you get struck by lightning?
Oh yeah.
Elsie Shady Foot.
Well, I mean, he talks about he talks about Nathan Bedford Forrest getting out of that last skirmish at the end of the battle.
Yeah.
like it's John Rambo leaving the woods of Vietnam with 50 guns firing upon him. He hero worships Forrest, and I get it. I totally get people like who you're gonna like, but it's an easy read. It's like 150 pages, but it's kind of a, I don't want to be insulting, but it's like a Shiloh for Dummies type book. It's a quick little overview. Well, I mean, but what it's, that series of books. But what it is, it puts in his opinion as fact. It just says here's what happened. And if you read a lot of other books, you'll find that he really focuses on the stuff he wants to focus on, and he minimizes the rest of it. He really talks about Forrest being the hero of Shiloh.
Yeah.
Which, okay. I mean, he certainly has moments.
Yeah. The one thing William says is that nobody listened to Forrest, and they should have, about what was happening with the Union Army. Barbara's wondering if you've read any books by Barbara Fields.
Oh yeah, absolutely. She's focused a lot on the Ken Burns documentary. If you watch that, so good. But she's got I'm blanking on the names of the title, Barbara Midley, but I've read a lot of her stuff. I mean, she's one of these people who is going back years as one of the more brilliant historical scholars. But she's really, really good.
Yeah, Charles mentions that we should put a recommended or not reading list on the website, which we have talked about doing.
Well, I mean, I would never put a not recommended just because it's my own personal opinion. I mean, people
definitely recommended though. When we get asked quite a bit, like someone asked us on here a few weeks ago, like, what would you recommend for someone just getting into the Civil War? And it's like, there's so much.
There's somebody in this house who insists on buying kale, and I don't like kale, so I would never tell people it's not good, because someone mistakenly likes kale. You know what the best way to serve kale is? You take it out of the bag, put it right in the trash barrel. That's the best way to serve kale.
I love kale.
There's your cooking tip from me today, Mary.
I love kale.
But I think I do think the suggested reading is a good idea. Yeah. The only book there was that book, I Am Abraham, about Lincoln.
Yeah. Oh, I didn't like that one.
That was one of the few books I got halfway through. I'm like, this is so bad, I can't read this anymore. I just threw it away.
I finished it. I muddled my way through it. I'm like, and then I read a really good one called Friend of Mr. Lincoln, I think it was. It was so good. And it was it was a fictional friend that this author made up, but it tells about Lincoln's days in Springfield, and it was so well written. It's really cool. Barbara mentions, I can't believe it's been 33 years since the Burns series. We were talking about that yesterday with
that guy from the Sons of the Union Veterans. He asked us,
what do you think of it? And we said it has its place. It got people into the Civil War, but it's dated, obviously. And there's
the fact of the matter is the Ken Burns documentary and the movie Gettysburg have done more for the Civil War popular culture and the Renaissance than anything. So whether and I realized that they said the Battle of Gettysburg was over shoes, and he says that, and but still it got people into it. And Elsie's on here. I think he's a reenactor. It really jumped and really injected adrenaline into the reenactment movement.
Yeah.
Right. It was the movie Gettysburg and the Ken Burns, and so and for good or bad, whether you like reenacting or not, but it really jump started it.
Yeah, it did. And it got, and I still tell people watch it. It's actually, I think if anybody, if anybody's local library has the Canopy app, you can download Canopy and you get 10 movies a month, and they often have really good documentaries on there. And I'm pretty sure Ken Burns Civil War is on Canopy, and I sometimes put it on and watch it. Like it's good.
Hey, if anything, it's got a great soundtrack.
I love the soundtrack. Music is beautiful.
I mean, Ashokan's Farewell is not the most historically accurate one for it, but you got some great. But I remember watching that. That came out in like the early '90s, late '80s, wasn't it? I was a kid.
Oh God, I remember watching it with my parents, and I was like, I don't know, I was like 9 or 10 or something like that.
Yeah. No, he's it's really good because it tells it. Barbara Fields is in it. Obviously, Shelby's in it. There's a lot of people in it who who really know their stuff. It's funny if you made that today, who'd be in it, right? Gary would probably be in it. So it's interesting to see how these, but it tells a story. It's a good intro, even though I think it's like 8 episodes. I think it is. Is it 8?
Yep.
Maybe it's more.
I can't remember how many.
Yeah. But it's really, I think I have it on DVD somewhere around here, but it's really, if everyone's seen it, but it really gave a good, it really gave a good description. I thought a lot of the soldier stories. Elijah Hunt Rhodes from Rhode Island, he's focused a lot in it, as is Sam Watkins is focused a lot. So they do take that approach like we do of going from that soldier level and going up. It's not all about Lee quotes and Grant quotes. Hunt Rhodes, he takes he did a lot of that stuff was from that for the Union diary he wrote. And as his company H for Sam Watkins. So it's definitely interesting. I like it, but it was fun talking yesterday with that guy about it.
Well, he was getting all fired up about it. Like he was all excited to go and learn more about the Civil War, which is really cool. Barbara mentions that she's always loved history, but her mother took her to see Gone with the Wind on the big screen for the 30th anniversary in 1969. And we were talking about that with my dad, you know, how he went to see it and stuff. I love the soundtrack. I love the first part of the movie. I'm not a fan of the second.
Yeah, if they stop the movie,
I'm like, ugh.
If they stop the movie halfway through when they did a little intermission, the second half, I mean, I like Gone with It. It's fine. Margaret Mitchell's book is really good.
It's a great story.
We saw her grave recently, Mary.
We did. Yep.
She got hit by a car, stumbled into the streets.
Yeah.
Got hit by a car.
Yeah. So I've admittedly never read the book, but I'd seen the movie many times. And you know, and I understand like why, you know, members of my family had like a certain like view on Sherman, and that was why. And I'm like, oh dear. Like, to go into like damage control.
No, but you know what though? She's talking about again. It's no different than Margaret.
It's from the Atlanta perspective.
It's no different. It's no different from the Chestnut stuff. It really isn't. If you read that, it's what they felt at the time. And granted, Scarlett O'Hara. It's all fictional characters. But what was brilliant about that book in the movie was they looked at Sherman as if he was the monster from Cloverfield. They never showed them. You just saw the glow and the fire in the distance, and he was this monster coming. And it really added, especially in the movie, it added of that foreboding doom that was coming, and it really focused on the fear of the residents of Atlanta. Now, look, there's no more Lost Cause thing than Gone with the freaking Wind. I get that, but it's still interesting to read the perspective. Whether you agree with it or not, it's still that's the perspective.
And who was it that we talked about with when we had her on was the author of that book about Sherman's March in Memory. And she talks about that in the book, about how Gone with the Wind and the influence. And I think
Dr. Rubin.
Yeah, Dr. Rubin. And it's got like
and the book is obviously way better than the movie. The book is probably
that's what Miranda said.
But again, it's I think that won the Best Picture award, didn't it? Academy Award. Yeah, I think it did. But again, it is what it is.
I think it's, you know, it, and yes, it does. It's kind of that, like, you know, the perspective of Mary Chestnut as well. I know there's some people that don't like her, and yeah, a lot of the stuff she's writing about it turned out not true or whatever, but it's her thoughts at the time. And yes, it must have been terrifying for the people of Atlanta. You know, you know, this guy's coming, and Sherman's already got like a reputation by the time he gets to Atlanta, which I think comes from what he did when he did his little fun run through, what was that, when he was doing his test for the March to the Sea.
Meridian campaign?
Meridian. I think stuff had filtered down by that point. And then when he starts marching through Georgia, there's like this, oh shit.
Well, I mean, he's working his way through. You got Battle of Resaca, you've got Dallas, you've got New Hope Church, you've got Pickett's Mill. And Johnson's falling back. And it's probably similar to the feeling that the people in Gettysburg had when they heard the Confederates were coming. They talk about seeing the campfires on South Mounts and all that stuff. But from a citizen perspective, her book it captures the feeling of the emotions at the time.
Yeah.
Right. Because all they knew was what they were being told.
Yeah.
They didn't have Twitter back then, Mary. Thank God for that. Right.
God. Could you imagine?
Sherman's coming. LOL.
Oh.
Anyways,
I wonder if Mary Chestnut's dresses had pockets in them.
Oh God,
she would have bitched about that.
Probably a big brutal.
Anyway, Elsie mentioned Ledley's drunk run at Oxford and North.
You know what's so funny? He mentions Ledley. As much as Iverson and Grant, these guys get ripped. I don't think anyone compares to the drinking that Ledley did. And his great drinking moments by far the Crater of Petersburg when he's one hamburger away from being David Hasselhoff in the hotel room, and ends up blowing up Burnside's plan of the Crater. But that's that's another thing. But I digress about
literally.
Well, exactly. There you go. Well done.
So there was this book I'm reading too right now. It's actually written by Williams, the same guy that does the Beauregard biography. And he does these 3 essays on McClellan, Sherman, and Grant. And he opens up the Sherman one by saying like he had a burning desire for like achievement or something. This guy said the Williams sense of humor is so.
Oh yeah, well I'm gonna write a book someday, and it's gonna be on Tilden, and it's gonna be all kinds of things like that. I'm gonna throw all kinds of innuendos in there.
Yeah, well, I'm gonna do that with my Howard book too.
Oh yeah, I'll be excited. I have a centerfold in your book. Like the old Teen Beat magazine with the big poster.
The Teen Beat magazine, the Civil War edition.
I don't know if that's even still a thing anymore.
I don't think it is.
I have to ask Gentili about that. He probably has a subscription to it. It was great to see John this a couple of days ago. Mary we had some shenanigans. I went over McClellan's retreat, went over Old Ebbitt. That was a great night. John, that was fun. Appreciate you
definitely
coming out.
Definitely have to get back to Washington again soon. I want to get back there. Barbara says that the railroad scene in Gone with the Wind is really good with all the wounded. It is like, I think that's when they pull back the camera and you can see all these wounded guys. And then she also mentions the documentary that's included on the DVD set has a making of Gone with the Wind.
Oh, okay. Okay.
There's like a tour you can do in Atlanta for it too, I think.
Oh, sure. I'm sure there is. I mean,
back in Canada, when I worked at the library there, she did it when there was a library conference in Atlanta, and she took a couple extra days because Gone with the Wind is like her favorite thing ever. But she's not in the Civil War. I remember one time she asked me, "How do you feel as a person who studies the Civil War about Gone with the Wind?" I'm like, well,
I mean,
and they still ride off of that, because that winery we went to in Georgia, one of their most popular wines is called Scarlet.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's nothing wrong with that. I mean,
no.
A school not far from here, a school that I cannot stand, Boston University, they're the Terriers, but their mascot, because their colors are scarlet and white, their mascot's name is Rhett.
So cool.
For that, so it's Gone with the Wind. If you drive by Kenmore Square, they'll throw diplomas at you from BU as you go by, Mary. That's a fact.
Frank said, "Will Mary's book show a Jack like Stonewall Manassas depiction of Howard?"
Oh, you open up, it'll probably smell, but cologne will probably be in there. Probably, you can only imagine how that book's going to be.
I wasn't the one that said he had a manly face. It was the reporter.
No, but you said he had rock hard abs.
No, I didn't.
You show bullshit. Yes, you did. You said he had rock hard abs from riding the horse with one arm.
Oh my God. So embarrassing. Anyway,
I don't even think that's a thing.
No, it's not what I said, but anyway, moving on.
Yes, she did. Okay.
It's horrible.
Don't forget, Mary, when you lie, you're only hurting yourself. And I'm pointing, so I'm serious.
Don't point.
Anyway, but that's fun. That's pretty good though.
Miranda said she did the tour, so she went to her grave, her home in the museum in Jonesboro. We were in Jonesboro, right? That's where that Confederate cemetery is for Claiborne's guys.
Right with the Atlanta campaign, when they started to swing around the old Savannah from Atlanta there. But what's neat about it is the cemetery was built right where the soldiers fell. Yeah. They just put a cemetery there, and they had a big Confederate flag flying over it. But that train track where they were desperately trying to get is still there. It was right by it. And so if you want to look at, a lot of Atlanta, the battle stuff is gone. We went to Ezra, and it's a playground. But it's basically, think Chantilly. That's Ezra, right? Yeah. And if you go to Jonesboro though, there's a railroad track that was right by the cemetery, and in the cemetery is where the battle line was. And so they just buried the people where they fell, and they put gravestones there.
And it's the Patrick Claiborne Cemetery.
It's Patrick Claiborne Cemetery. Absolutely right.
Yep. Yeah, because we were looking around, we were driving by, and I'm like, Jonesboro, there was a battle there. And then we looked it up, and we're like, oh shit, there's a cemetery there named after Claiborne. So we went to see it, and it was really cool. That's the neat thing about traveling in Atlanta, is there's so much you can see between Chattanooga and Atlanta.
No, that's what's cool. And we had to go find that. It was way off the beaten path.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it was still worth it. It was so worth it to do. And there's still places we haven't seen. Like we haven't seen Peachtree Creek yet. I don't think we've been to Resaca. But we saw Kennesaw. Bill, every time Mayor lies, another Canadian forest burns.
Ooh, tough.
That whole thing. The
you know.
smoke of the fires.
Yeah, that was a real thing. We had it here a lot, and then driving to Washington the other day, it was going through New York City, going down 95. It was weird. It was like apocalyptic type thing.
Yeah.
And that first night in Washington, the next day was all gone.
Yeah, it was fine the next day. Yeah, it was totally clear and all this other stuff. But yeah, the Atlanta stuff was really cool. And what did she say? It's not a thing. Okay.
Tell me about it. Just goes to
anyway,
sometimes.
Moving on. Yeah, the Atlanta stuff was really, really cool to see all that. And then next time we go, we got to get up to like Shiloh and Franklin and Spring Hill. And
no, I mean, people talk a lot about places like Virginia, Maryland, but if you go from, you start at Andersonville and you work your way north and start moving west to Atlanta, there's almost every stop is worth. There's so many good places to go.
Oh, yeah,
speaking of Ken Burns, he said there were 10,000 battles in the Civil War. May not be 10,000.
There's certainly a lot.
There's certainly a lot.
Go. And I mean, Pickett's Mills was great too, because they were so happy to have visitors that were actually there for the battle.
Yeah, it's that was a fun day because the people were really cool. We kind of got the secret stonecutter tour in the back room there too, just unexpectedly. That was pretty cool.
Yeah.
But no, it's definitely fun. But I'm definitely looking forward to Cold Harbor this week. That'll be a lot of fun.
That'll be cool. That'll be good to do that. Yeah, because it's not one I've studied a lot. Because admittedly, I still am. I'm more into the Eastern Theater than I once was because of you. But I was stuck out in the Western Theater for a long time. I still say that it was the more strategic victories were out there.
They definitely were. We've said before that the Western battles were the offensive linemen, the Eastern battles were the quarterbacks, the receivers.
I find the characters out there, nothing against the Eastern Theater guys, but I find the characters out there, like the generals, they're so much more, I don't know, there's more going on. And I think it's because it's so far away from where the administration is on both sides.
Right.
And there's this Wild West attitude. Like, I love studying Army of Tennessee, the Confederate one. And because I find it so much more interesting than Army of Northern Virginia, just because of the political dynamics that are happening, how the people put in charge were put in charge because they were friends with the people organizing it. And the ones that should have been higher up were the talent, and they just didn't get the positions because they weren't liked. And because
you think about the fact that Halleck was the original guy out there for Grant.
Yeah.
And even after Donaldson and Henry, Halleck wanted him gone. He's like, oh shit, this guy might be good. I need to get him out of here because it's going to make me look bad. But all this stuff is personal. It's no different than it is today. The politics, it's just the same damn thing.
You see the same insults. You see the same, and they haven't, people don't change over the years. They, there's a funny story that when Howard went out to the Western Theater that, Sherman really liked him a lot. Right. But the first night there, he goes to the campfire to sit with them, and Sherman and I think it was General Reb Jefferson C. Davis start dropping swear words left, right, and center to the point where it made Howard so uncomfortable he left, and he was pissed off. And I think Sherman eventually went and apologized to him for it, but also told Howard, dude, you need to lighten up.
I mean, you're fighting in a war, people getting killed around you left and right, but it was good. But yeah, well, Washington, speaking of John, that was a good time, John. Washington was great. Went to Fort Stevens. That was pretty neat. I felt it's kind of tough though, because it's not in the greatest neighborhood and they don't take care of it. There were probably, I swear to God, somebody left an empty beer can for every soldier who fell there, apparently, because it was beer cans all strewn throughout the place, which is unfortunate. But it does give you an idea of how close Jubal Early came, in 64 to get into Washington. And it also gives you a good idea of all the forts that surrounded Washington. And that, and that's where Abraham Lincoln fought. There's a really cool cemetery that's where the men who fell at Fort Stevens is right up Georgia Avenue, just about maybe like a mile north of the cemetery of the battlefield. And it's very well done. It's very well done. So if you go up to Washington, go up to Stevens, go during the day.
Yeah, and not go at night.
And go check it out because it's really cool. It's one of those places, it's funny seeing a battlefield and a Civil War cemetery and monuments in an urban site like that in the North. But I'm sure John's been there. I know Kevin mentioned he's been on here. He's been there a lot too. It's definitely worth going to. It is.
Yeah. Barbara mentions, this is a good question. If Lee named his Army of Northern Virginia, what was it called before him? And it was, believe it or not, Army of Potomac.
Yeah, they flipped.
And that's what it was called under when Beauregard commanded that army. That's what
it was like the New York Yankees and Baltimore Orioles. They flipped names.
Yep.
When they fly switch, yeah.
And they had like uniform issues too. Some of the Confederates at First Manassas were wearing like blue, and some of the Union guys were wearing gray.
So right, so at First Manassas, a lot of the Confederates wore blue Union uniforms. And you know what they did? A lot of the generals had the soldiers put a white handkerchief on their arm, like capture the flag in elementary school, so you knew what team you were on. They were doing that, and that went. I mean, it was a big, huge mess at First Manassas if you look at that. But that's the thing. When you think of the traditional butternut or the gray versus the blue, that didn't come till later.
Yeah,
a lot. When you look at the beginning of the Civil War, a lot of them wore the same damn uniforms, and so it'd be easy to pretend you were on this army or that army. But that's how they did it. So you wouldn't be shot. So if you're Confederates, you put the white handkerchief on.
Yeah.
So your own men wouldn't shoot you.
Yeah. Ryan mentions that Howard used to party with Sickles, Hookie Carney, and Dan the Man Butterfield.
I saw Dan Butterfield's. I saw Butterfield's Medal of Honor at the Smithsonian the other day. Speaking of that, so pretty good. They kept it in a case probably because of the syphilis that's on it, but that's okay. But it was pretty cool to see. And there was obviously Medal of Honor is a big deal. They've obviously changed their criteria since the Civil War. We talked a lot about the Battle of Spotsylvania, where men got it for picking up flags and things like that. Now it's a little bit different, but it's still impressive to see. If you go to the Museum of American History, go to the second floor, you'll see the Spotsylvania stump we talked about.
That was really cool.
But you'll see they have a really cool Medal of Honor section that talks about the history of it. That's definitely the place to go. Yeah.
Oh yeah, Barbara just said thanks for the stuff about the Army of the Potomac. But yeah, that's really cool that's what they were called. It's interesting that's what they were called. And then in the Western Theater you have Army of Tennessee, which is the Confederates, and Army of the Tennessee.
Tennessee.
Admittedly,
it's confusing on paper, but the soldiers at the time it doesn't really matter. But yeah, it was always fascinating how they changed the names of that. And it was an Army of Virginia in the North under John Pope.
Yep.
So it's just.
There were
22 Confederate armies operating in the American Civil War. There were 16 Union armies.
Yeah.
And obviously the AOP and the Army of Northern Virginia gets most of the credit, but there were a lot of them. There were actually a lot.
Yeah, Sherman had 3 under him on the march at one point during the Atlanta campaign and after Chickamauga or Chattanooga, which he had Army of Cumberland, Army of the Ohio, Army of the Cumberland, Army of the Ohio, and Army of the Tennessee. Were the 3 that he had.
No, there's quite a few of them, and so if you look at it, gets confusing when you go to the monuments. Sometimes you see these things, especially Army of Tennessee versus the Tennessee.
Yeah,
Well,
I used to mix them up all the time. I'm like, okay, the Confederates didn't have the other; they're just the state of Tennessee, whereas the Cumberland,
the river.
Yeah, they're named after the rivers.
Mm-hmm. Usually, the dog gives it away. Usually, but it's fascinating visiting these places. It really, really is, because you get a different perspective when you visit. You can read about them all you want, but until you actually go there, you can't get the full effect.
No.
Of going.
That's what we found with like Pickett's Mill was, and same with Kennesaw is they're both terrible battles on the Atlanta campaign. You don't realize how bad. And you kind of come away with this, what the hell was Sherman thinking? And we talked about that in our episode about Pickett's Mills, like. Why was he not called out more for this? And that goes back to why you need to read so much, because if you just read Sherman's memoirs on and specifically his section on the Atlanta campaign, you're going to come away from it never knowing that Pickett's Mill even happened, because he does not talk about it. No. And that's why I think one of the reasons why Ambrose Bierce calls it the crime, because you think about it, you're fighting at Pickett's Mills, and it's probably one of the most horrific battles you've ever been in. And that's what Howard said. Howard said nothing compares to what he witnessed there. He said it was a nightmare. And Sherman decides to not. What are you doing?
I'm just reading the comments. Toasting with water. But what do you say toasting with water? What are you talking about?
Because Ryan commented about Howard parting with Sickles, Carney, and Dan the Man Butterfield.
I'm actually reading the comments today, man. I don't usually. I'm going to do it today.
And there's a story that Sears talks about where Howard is at one of the parties and he toasts everybody with water.
Oh, that's bad luck right there.
I know.
My Irish grandfather, who died a long time ago, he would have rued the day. You toast with water. He was in his casket at the wake. I could still smell the whiskey. That's how much he drank. I'm not kidding. I'm telling you.
But anyway, so Sherman, if you just read his memoirs in the Atlanta campaign, you're not going to realize that there's Pickett's Mills. And that's why Bierce calls him out for it. And Pickett's Mills, the site, a lot of their interpretation is based on what Ambrose Bierce wrote.
No, Bierce was interesting. We talked a lot about him when we did the Halloween episode, the first one with Jay Price back there, Vincent Price in our Halloween episode. We talked about that. And really, he's somebody who was very vivid and but he was also Debbie Downer.
He's very angry.
He talked about all the negative crap. It's like Stephen King modern day back then. And what's interesting about him is when he goes to visit the battlefields after the war and he disappears, no one knows what happened to him.
Nope.
They think he went into Mexico and something happens, and that was the end of it. But he's interesting. His account of Pickett's Mill is really, really good, because when you talk about everything that happens, it's amazing they actually chose to fight there. I know they had to find the right flank, of the army, but you almost by happenstance, those 2 battalions that got around the right who got lost.
Yeah.
But the rest of them hit Granbury and Govan straight on.
The
absolute iron. And for that terrain, if you haven't been to Pickett's Mill, if you're in Atlanta or if you're in that area, go to Pickett's Mill. And because it's really neat. It's a great walk. It's beautiful, first of all, and it's almost pristine. It's one of the few battlefields you go to that is almost exactly the same as it was. Almost
and they
exactly.
They take pride in that, and they should. And I think one of the reasons, why it's not talked about more, I think might be a little bit because Sherman just doesn't mention it. But I mean, being there, it's like I see why Bierce and other men would have got angry with him, because it's like, wow, you're forgetting about our friends who fell here, who died horrifically. Like Howard, I mentioned his quote was like, he remembers after the battle, there's soldiers walking around with, they're missing a leg, they're missing an arm, they're missing their eyes, and he said, and the ones that, and he said a lot of the men resorted to drinking that night, because he said he'd seen Antietam and that was bad, and Gettysburg was the same, but he said nothing ever compared to Pickett's Mills.
No, that was a bad spot. It was a bad day for Mother, unfortunately, for that. Yeah. It really, really was.
And it really just shows too that, I know there's some people that say, well, the Atlanta campaign was successful because Sherman eventually got Atlanta and that's all that matters. But you have to remember, he got Atlanta because the men were fighting hard for it. But it's not, when you look at the battles, when you get down and you dig deeper, he doesn't have that many wins.
Sherman?
Yeah.
No, he's a different, his philosophy is a little bit different than Grant's. Grant is, exposed himself recklessly, but Sherman was more of a get around, get behind, force the other team to play defense, which is probably better. The other thing people, you forget, I know you don't, but a lot of people do, is how good Sherman was learning and knowing the territory.
Yeah.
He was an expert at reading maps. He just was. And that's what got him headed to Pickett's Mill, is there was no good maps. When he left that railroad and he was swung around towards Dallas, Georgia, not Dallas, Texas, but towards Dallas, Georgia. That's Ben's down there in Dallas, Texas, by the way, there.
Yeah.
Go Rangers, right?
Yeah.
but when they swing around, is there's no maps of the area. And so when you're talking some of the deepest brush that you will see, just if you go to places like New Hampshire up here, and you look at the forest, there are places here that no human foot has ever stepped on.
Yeah.
Because it's just wilderness. And they're having to march all these men through there. And he thought he was going to get to Atlanta within a couple weeks.
Yeah,
it took forever, and it was because of the terrain. It was also Joseph E. Johnson. There's no question about that.
Joseph E. Johnson was I like him, and I don't think he gets enough credit. He's very, he's not the aggressive commander that Davis wanted at the time, but then he doubles down on that and puts Hood in charge, which, Hood is great division, great corps, but he's the guy that you do not want leading your army, because he's going to put you through a meat grinder.
No, he definitely peaked, but he did a good job because he was severely outnumbered. The numbers did balance off in time.
Yeah.
But when we talk about numbers, when when you look at numbers, just changing gears, I'm going to try to spill this over to Cold Harbor.
We haven't got the episode yet, so it doesn't matter.
No, I guess it's true. But heading into Cold Harbor, the numbers are about as close as they ever would have been, because you had almost a 2-to-1 advantage with the Wilderness. And as much as the Confederates were losing men, Grant was losing men by the droves. He was throwing them at the grinder. Just go for it. And, the Wilderness cost him a lot. Spotsy cost him a lot. North Anna. But when and this is when for the first time, Grant had to go to his bullpen.
Yeah.
And he gets those heavy artillery guys who spent the war guarding Washington. I mentioned Fort Stevens. You go to Fort Stevens, you see those big, heavy artillery guns, those permanent guns. That's what those men defended. They were not battle guys. They basically stood around waiting to be attacked. They had no action. Now they're called into action. And for whatever reason, those are the first troops that are put into battle at Cold Harbor. Inexperienced green men against Lee's Army of Northern Virginia. These battle-tested dudes. By the time you got to Cold Harbor, they were the Iron Brigade for them, almost all of them.
Yeah.
And there's so many stories of these green soldiers who fought well. Guys from Connecticut. There was a regiment from Niagara Falls, New York, who came down who fought very, very well, but they got cut down because of just a lack of experience in the bad battle plan. And this stories that Grant openly wept in his tent after this, after Cold Harbor, because he took his men and just threw them right in to see what would stick. And it was a real bad moment. It was a good moment for Lee, but he had no reserves. He was done. If Grant had broken that line, he had a clear road to Richmond. He did. Yeah. And Lee had no idea the battle was even being successful. He found out later, just like Spotsylvania, but on the other side now. Mm-hmm. And if you visit Cold Harbor, and a lot of people have, is the breastworks are fantastic, and you can still see them, and they're very powerful. We were over Gaines Mill, that battle right nearby. It was kind of fought in that same area. Where the Gaines Mill battlefield is a lot, and there's stories of Union soldiers tripping on skulls on the ground from Gaines Mill as they were attacking.
I can't even imagine. I mean, 1864 is just such a different beast than 1863 as far as
what does that do to you? You're a green soldier from the Connecticut, the second Connecticut, I think it is. You're a green soldier and you're marching down a hill and you trip and fall over a skull. I mean, just imagine that.
Oh yeah,
what does that
mean?
Yeah,
it's terrible. I mean, like I said, 1864 is just like this different. I mean, all the wars horrific. But it's just this different beast, because I think like they're fighting now with like this, like we need to end this, and like they're like, angrier or whatever.
Well, the style changed. I mean, everything changed really at Spotsylvania when the war turned into a Napoleonic shoulder to shoulder, file closers, keep everybody together type of battle to true trench warfare. And all the battles, for the most part, after Spotsylvania were all trench warfare. Every one of them. Yeah,
and
it turned
into
digging, entrenching, breastworks, firing, trying to capture the breastworks.
Yeah.
You could look at Petersburg, right? You talk about the 8th Vermont specifically, people like that, and it's amazing. Turn the bells going off
because it's church time. For everybody, if you can hear the bells, there's a church in our neighborhood that. They feel
usually it goes at 12 o'clock.
Okay.
Oh, that's right. This is Sunday. It's Saturday.
And on Sundays it rings at 7:20 in the morning and then 11:20 in the morning. Good times.
Big dawn. Anyway, enjoy the bells in the background. Yep. But the trench warfare is a change of style. It's a completely change of philosophy, and that's where people like Grant and Cleburne did well. We mentioned at the beginning of this because they weren't embedded in their head with that baggage of West Point.
Yeah, well, Grant went to West Point, but he was evolutionary in how he thought.
Right.
He thought. Cleburne has British Army experience, but again, he doesn't have the formal training, and that's just what makes him my opinion is he's the best the Confederates had on Eastern, Western.
What really made Grant was his ability to change. And we talk like Emory Upton at Spotsylvania.
Yeah,
is how he's able to get an idea of maybe we can burst through, and he's open to different ideas. He's not tunnel vision like Lee was. And nothing against Lee, but that's just how they're wired.
Well, it's how
Grant was a great horseman in West Point. He had to be a great infantry, type of general, but he changed with the fly with it. He was able to read the room and know the tea leaves by looking at them that things were changing. And that's really what separates Grant from a lot of them. It really does.
Oh, I agree. And I think too, that has to do with his experience as well in the Western theater, because the terrain out there is so different. So they had to start fighting a different style, a different type of war. In the biography I'm reading about Beauregard, William says that his one fault was the fact that he couldn't get Jomini out of his head. He had to have it fought a certain way. And Beauregard didn't like anybody, but that's why he didn't, I think it was Winfield Scott who he just did not like, because at Mexico, he starts breaking away from that Napoleonic style war and says, we have to do this differently. And Beauregard's like, I don't know. And William says that would make or break a Civil War general. If they couldn't get Jomini out of their head and change, then they were not going to be successful.
Well, it's again, attack, retreat, maneuver, attack, retreat, maneuver. That was the whole ideas in these guys' heads. That's how it was. The golden bridge, or the golden, the iron gate, all that stuff they taught you at West Point. And that's the truth about a lot of this stuff is the best ones did adapt. They really did.
Yeah. And the ones that could adapt and change, Claiborne, Grant, Sherman, they all kind of adapted and had to change the style of fighting. You see it at Chickamauga. I mean, the way you describe it is perfect. It's a bar fight that spills from room to room, but every room is different. And Pickett's Mills is an example too of, you can't do Napoleonic style fighting at Pickett's Mills.
No, it's impossible. And for the most part, a lot of the Western battles, you just couldn't anyway. I mean, despite, the Gettysburgs, the Antietam's of the world, the Monocacies, there's very few battlefields on open ground. They're mostly woods. They mostly are. Think Wilderness, think Chancellorsville in the East. That's how a lot of them were. And that's why artillery wasn't always a big factor. Traditionally, you wouldn't use artillery. You wouldn't fire on something you couldn't see.
Yeah.
And so a place like Pickett's Mill, the Wilderness, it was kind of deemed, useless.
I mean, if you go there, like you're screwed. Ski says, sorry, I'm late. I blame the cider.
The cider?
You're drinking the good stuff, Ski?
Cider? What, you go to the prom last night? Cider.
He's been hanging out with Gentili too long.
Oh God! Hey, I'm going to give Gentili credit. He drank some good beers. He was drinking Yingling at the old Ebbett Grill the other day, and
because you bullied him into it again.
I think he had some kind of. I forget what he was drinking at McClellan's retreat. I think he had some kind of with Corey. They were drinking some kind of hard drink. I don't know what the hell they were drinking, but that was a good time.
Anyway, what I was going to say is train left. Anyway, Frank says one of my favorite accounts of Cold Harbor is that of Lawrence Kite, who didn't adapt to the trench style warfare, and his 20th South Carolina suffered very badly. I mean,
if you didn't, or it's like a football coach. If you realize your game plan's not working, you have to have a plan B to change the style. Yeah. If you can't run the ball, you got to change and throw. A lot of these guys would keep running the ball. That's what happens. Yeah. In the good ones, like Grant, for example, Claiborne, they were able to realize that philosophy wasn't working. They had to change it. They weren't set in their ways, and that's a big part of it. That's a big part of it.
And that's where Claiborne's talent really shows, is he was able to look at a situation and be like, how can I do better the next time? I can't change the past, but I can, do better the next time. And that's why he had sharpshooters to take out not just the guys on the artillery on the other side, but the horses. Because he knew without the horses, they can't pull the artillery. And that's because of what happened to him at Shiloh. He realized, like, shit, if I've been able to take out the artillery on the Union, maybe things would have been different, never know, but maybe they would have been different. And two, but if something worked for him, Claiborne would do it again, because at Pickett's Mill, he does something very similar to what he does at Ringgold Gap. He hides his men. He hides the artillery. So Howard is not able to see, what's going on. And I mean, Howard's, letter to Thomas and Sherman, where he's like, I think, it's like, was there a question mark there that you think, where they are, or you do, you're 100% sure?
No, I mean, you couldn't see anything at Pickett's Mill. I mean, Pickett's Mill is just a mess. I mean, it just was, and the carnage that these poor guys had to deal with. And at the end of the day, it didn't really matter. I mean, if they fall back a little bit, you do have some success that would come later. And they obviously did get to Atlanta, but the whole strategy, I mean, and give Johnson credit. He was able to set up that line, that the New Hope line, and they were able to keep Sherman at bay and force him to attack.
Yep.
Now, if that battle had gone at Allatoona Pass like he wanted it to be, it would have been worse for Sherman.
Oh yeah, but that's the thing where I think McPherson was supposed to attack at Allatoona Pass, and so was Thomas, and they were, McPherson and Thomas, and they were like, we can't do this.
Well, they couldn't do it. It would have been like Ringgold, but with 3 times as as many easily on each side.
Yeah.
But if you look at Allatoona Pass, you would have had to go right through literally run the gauntlet between 2 basic mountains, and they would have been. And Sherman, to his credit, he knew that. He said, we can't go through there. That's a killing field. So it ends up going through the woods and leaving that railroad track, the train, and going through the woods and coming around the backside and going towards Dallas. But it ended up being going into a situation where they weren't prepared to fight it. So question.
No. And it's such a fascinating study that nobody talks about, and just back to Cold Harbor, Miranda mentions it was a hard battlefield for her to visit because that's where her ancestor was taken as a POW before going to Elmira.
Oh, okay. Cold Harbor, you know what though? I don't want to say I was disappointed by Cold Harbor, but I expected more.
It's not as well preserved.
Gaines Mill was awesome.
Yeah, I love Gaines Mills.
Right around the corner during the all the 7 day stuff. But it's an interesting area because you can just see with a really good description or visual of what the breastworks were if you walk down that path, and how tough a guy you had to be. And again, when you look at the fact that a lot of these guys were seeing battle for the first time.
Yeah.
We talk about Rufus Dawes fighting a second Manassas for the first time, but there'd been other things he'd been involved in. He'd been in the field for a little while. These guys marched down from Washington right into the battlefield and were thrown right in.
Yeah.
And even experienced troops were going to get smoked because of how strong Lee's defensive line was. But these green guys, it's unbelievable,
Oh yeah, like new troops coming in at that point, like that's got to be something right there. It's like you've been on, doing kind of, not as much during the war, and then all of a sudden it's like, oh wow, we're really going
to. They were considered fake soldiers because they spent the entire war, the 3 years to that point, literally around the forts like Stevens, these other forts, just guarding in case something happens. Now, because of Grant's his philosophy of winning by attrition, he has to pull them in. And this, one corps we talk that really doesn't get a lot of credit at this point in the war is the 6th Corps.
Yes, and
right.
That's why I was just gonna say again, if anybody listening on here, like I said, Carol Reardon is on Battle of Gettysburg podcast. She talks about Sedgwick and she talks a lot about the 6th Corps. And she's so good. Like she knows her stuff about Sedgwick.
When you think Civil War, probably because of movies like Gettysburg and things like that, you think the 1st Corps. I mean, obviously you're a Crescent Moon girl, the whole deal. But if you want to look at that late half of the war, look at the 6th, because these are the guys who ultimately would defend Washington.
Frank Wheaton.
And Frank Wheaton. But when Sedgwick died at Spotsylvania, what a gigantic deal that was. Gigantic. We have fun with the whole elephant thing and all that stuff. But that was a big loss.
Yeah.
And Grant knew it. And that Corps was, they weren't very active in Gettysburg, and that's a big reason why people don't focus a lot on the 6th Corps. But specifically going into those later battles, on the Overland campaign, they were the Iron Brigade.
Yeah,
if you really think about it, as far as a corps goes, and that they were again, they were in reserve for Gettysburg, so people don't think of them with the 2nd Corps, the 3rd Corps, the 1st Corps, all those other ones. But for the end state, they were like the closer of the bullpen who came in and just finished done. Yeah, it was the 6th Corps.
Now, isn't at Fort Stevens, isn't that where Lew Wallace had a monument placed for? There's a monument then that saved Washington, D.C.
There's a monument there. There's a monument in the cemetery right on the corner. There's a monument that talks about Abraham Lincoln being there.
Yeah.
I'm sure some of those beer cans and monuments written on them probably. This is for you, Abe. Horatio Wright. You know.
Am I right though that it was Lou Wallace that?
Well, it was a 6 Corps who fought. It wasn't Wallace. It was.
No, I know that, but Lou Wallace, I know he fought at Monocacy, but Lou Wallace, I think, was one of the guys behind putting a monument there for the.
There's a monument in Monocacy about that to save Washington.
Oh, that's right. Okay.
It's not at Stevens. There's a monument. There's a couple monuments at Fort Stevens that talk about Abraham Lincoln fighting there. And then if you go to the little cemetery, there's a couple of 6 Corps monuments. There's one from New York. There's a couple other ones that talk about saving the Union in the presence of Abraham Lincoln, things like that. But Lou Wallace obviously was very instrumental to that. But the 6th Corps, was, if you're looking at baseball terms, they were the closer. They were the Mariano Rivera coming out of the bullpen. Was 6th Corps of the Potomac, and that's not hyperbole. It really, really was. And they definitely don't get the credit they deserve. They definitely don't.
No, and that's one thing Reardon mentions is that they're not talked about a lot. And two, Sedgwick was not a guy that really, advocated for himself. Like after Meade takes command of Army of the Potomac, Sedgwick, he's not married. He writes his sister a lot. And he says like, well, Meade took over the Army of the Potomac and he's aged about 20 years. Technically it should have been Sedgwick. He was higher ranking, but Sedgwick was not bothered by it,
No, he did his job. He didn't seem to care about anything beyond that. But again, he was Grant's. I mean, for all the stuff with Grant talking about Sherman, Sedgwick was a big go-to guy for him.
Yeah, I think there was definitely like a friendship there. There was definitely a respect because, Sedgwick's nickname is Uncle John. And I think, that's kind of like Sherman, Uncle Billy. There's this kind of, I think the men, they start to see them like father figures. And that's why, you have Uncle Billy, you have Uncle John. And then who knows how, Sedgwick dying that's one of the highest ranking officer, I think, killed in the Union Army. But you have after the Civil War, you have men that will fall on hard times and they will go to Sherman and ask for money. And he always gives it to them. Sherman was rich. Like he was loaded after the war. Well,
he did a lot of speaking engagements after the war. We talked last night, come back from the boat thing about, marching through Georgia, how he hated the song. Because they'd always played it when he took the stage. It was kind of like his
no more.
It was kind of like the Stone Cold Steve Austin coming to, is that Stone Cold's music? You hear that with Sherman. And he hated that song.
Yeah, well, he probably heard it so much. Who else had songs written about them was Beauregard.
Yeah.
Early in the war, I didn't realize that. Like they wrote songs. He was in his time. Beauregard was he was one of the most popular Confederate generals.
Well, he was very skilled.
Like sidelined by Davis, and I'll finish the biography and probably have more of an opinion on it. But I still think he is one of the ones that. Yes, he's stuck on Jomini, but I wonder, had he been given the chance, would he have evolved? Would he have changed his fighting style in the same way that, Claiborne did, that Grant did? Would he have got away from that? Would he have seen? But he's not given the chance because he's basically chained to a desk. Yeah,
there's like a cop doing something bad and got chained to a desk instead of going on the street. He does come back later.
Which he really doesn't. I mean, yeah, there's that. Williams really criticizes him for now Davis is meddling at this point, trying to figure out how do I get rid of Beauregard, and then Beauregard's like, "Well, I'm not feeling well. I'm going to go home," and he just leaves. Doesn't tell anybody.
Yeah, he takes a ball and goes. So,
and Williams is like, "This is not cool."
But so he's gone, and you end up with guys like Joseph Johnson, and of course Bragg, and it goes from there. But you got to play it out. Obviously, we talked a lot about Hood trying to advocate for that job for a while.
Yeah,
Joseph E. Johnson was probably the best they had, probably realistically speaking. I mean, Albert Sidney Johnson is the great what if because he gets killed so early.
Yeah.
But we'll never know. I mean, I know people like Ryan on here don't like Johnson, and a lot of people don't. But again, I always compare Albert Sidney Johnson to Bragg and what he would have done differently, and I have to think he would have been better. And I do think he would have been offered a little bit more defense against Grant. I don't think it changes the war. I think Grant rolls over him too, but just because of the numbers. But I think he handles things a little bit differently. I don't know I'm not sure how Chattanooga plays out if Johnson's in charge instead of Bragg.
Yeah, well, I'm thinking that.
And you look at and probably the bottom of the barrel for Bragg is probably Tullahoma, right?
That's,
he basically
bad.
Well, it's Stones River too. I mean,
but Tullahoma is also a brilliant campaign. Oh, Leonard's on here. He said Bowen was the best they had.
Of course, Bowen was the Gavin Bowen. He absolutely was.
The Gavin Bowen.
but no, but it's. I mean, Stones River. And that whole it wasn't really for lack of effort for that one. I mean, they're both attacking different flanks for different reasons. And you got the great Phil Sheridan, Miranda, who's going to go ahead and is going to be successful there. No one likes Sheridan, but he has one of his better moments there. One of his three good moments in the Civil War, if you think about it. But it's forced, and then they're going to sit there, and then we talk a little about Rosecrans. But Rosecrans sits on his ass for months in Stones River.
Yeah.
He doesn't attack.
No.
And then when he finally goes into Tullahoma, Bragg is completely unaware of what the hell's going on. And I think Tullahoma is probably Bragg's worst moment, I think. If you look at best versus worst.
Yeah.
And then if that point over, the whole thing's done and he's got to be replaced. And it goes from there.
Well, the one thing I'm thinking too, and I do think about the Albert Sidney Johnston stuff, what if he hadn't been killed at Shiloh? But I often wonder, what if they kept Beauregard in charge? How does Vicksburg play out? How does Chickamauga play out? How does Chattanooga play out? Is that when we start to see Beauregard change and evolve and get away from Jomini? We'll never know. And he's, I've always thought Beauregard was one of the bigger what ifs of the Civil War because he.
Yeah, I don't know about the Vicksburg thing, but I mean,
I still think Grant rolls over him because Grant's campaign is brilliant.
Yeah.
But there's other Confederate armies involved in Vicksburg, though. So I'm saying. Oh no, I understand that. No, I get. But you said, regarding Albert Sidney Johnston, does he offer more of a defense?
Yeah, right.
That's what I mean.
I'm talking. More towards specifically Atlanta. I know that was mostly Sherman, but how he defends going from that point on, how he would go against Rosecrans, the Stones River, how he'd go. I just think Tullahoma is just such a disaster for them and for him personally. And you got these guys, I mean, writing letters to a petition to get rid of him and things like that. Yeah. I don't know. But there was
that guy on social media, shocker. I posted a quote about Bragg and he's trying to tell me, no, Bragg was liked. And I'm like, hey, yes, a few people liked him, but this wasn't an everyone hates Raymond situation here. This was one that he had his enemies and he had his detractors. But again, a lot of people I'm sure liked him. He did really did a good job restructuring the army, adding discipline again. But there's a reason why all these guys like Claiborne and Longstreet signed the letter to get it. I mean, Longstreet wanted the job because that's why he goes out west, because he's like, but a lot of them, I get it, but I can't think of too many Confederate or Union Civil War generals who had their high-ranking subordinates sign a petition to get rid of them. That's bad. That's really bad.
I mean, that's. I mean, even Sheridan, I don't think got that. No. Except Meade probably would have.
Leonard said effing Sheridan.
I don't think anybody hated Sheridan more than George Meade.
No.
I think if they met today somewhere in the celestial plane, I think Meade would knock him on his ass. I think Meade hated him. Oh, did he hate him?
Yeah.
I mean, and their hatred was a big reason why Jeb Stuart got killed.
Yep.
It was because Grant's like, boys, get away.
Yep.
Sheridan, fine. You want to get the hell out of here? Go chase Jeb Stuart.
Yeah.
And how much that hatred led to all those deaths in Spotsylvania because they had no cavalry.
Yeah, and that's the one thing that the book I read by Chris Makowski, was, he said, was going after Jeb Stuart worth it? Like for these many deaths, because did that, and I think Chris mentions in the book, he talks about how was Jeb Stuart really that important? But Sheridan makes it out to be such a big deal.
He was important because he was. I mean, Jeb was a big player in the obviously in the cavalry. But again, I know Makowski makes that case in his book about, I think he said it was 10,000 men it cost. It's 10,000 versus one. Well, I mean, I don't know how accurate that is, but it's a good description of what it was.
It makes you think about it a little bit differently, and too, to remember that. And I mean, you described Sheridan perfectly. You said this is a guy that he's got, he does 5 things wrong and then like how does something right. And it's like, okay, you can get promoted.
Phil Sheridan's the guy why people still do scratch tickets. Okay. You lose 9 times in a row, but then you buy one, you'll win. You win $40, but oh shit, I won money. Then you buy, that's what he was. You have all these horrible events that he does, but then you have Cedar Creek, you have Stones River, right? You have Yellow Tavern.
He's okay at Chattanooga.
Right. So he has some good moments, but for the most part, he just, and then towards the end, they put him in charge down there heading towards Five Forks and that stuff, the Appomattox campaign, when he gets rid of guys like G.K. Warren.
Yeah, that's why I don't like him.
Well, that's what his ego takes over. And he realizes that it's the bottom of the 9th inning. You're up by 10. This thing's about to end here. Yeah. I need to make sure, as the musical chairs ends, Mary.
Who's that?
You got to never stick with musical chairs. But that he was going to be one of the guys. Hey, you know what? He's got a gravestone all by himself at Arlington, right up there. And it says Jones on it. One of the better. Guess what says in Sheridan's gravestone? What, Mary? Sheridan. Oh, okay.
Well, just because there's no dates, nothing.
I know. I know what you were saying. We just find the way you said it, but all right, we should jump off here pretty soon, right? It's almost that time.
It is, yes. Yeah. Well, thank you everyone for coming out today to our live stream. We will probably hopefully on here again next weekend.
We got a lot of fun stuff coming up. So
oh yeah, we should so July 1st at 4:30, if any of y'all are in Gettysburg, we are going to be doing a private tour at the Spengler Farm with we're partnering with the Gettysburg Foundation and our friend Mark, who is part of that. He's going to be giving a tour. He gives an excellent tour out there. So 4:30 at the Spengler Farm. Join us. We're doing
that. We'll do some pop-up lives. We're going to be doing a Facebook Live from the gatehouse of the cemetery at Gettysburg on July 2nd in the morning. We got the guy who runs that's going to let us in there and do some stuff. So if you want to see what the inside of the gatehouse looks like, at the cemetery at Evergreen, where Howard met with the guys, and we're going to be in the basement, the first floor, the second floor. We're going to be all through there, so we'll be able to do that for a while. And there'll be some other fun stuff we'll be doing too. So Gettysburg's coming up, and I know there's Vicksburg, Leonard. I know, but this that's where we're going to be. So we're going to be doing a lot of stuff like that. So there'll be a lot of fun. There'll be a lot of fun stuff we'll be doing. We'll be doing an event at Fourscore. Yeah, probably July 2nd, I believe. Right?
Weren't we going to do that in the first?
First, that's right.
After kind of we're going to go out to Spangler for the tour out there, probably about an hour, and it's free as well. So
history should always be free, Mary.
I agree.
It should be free. Because you know something, these people, their voices need to be told, and everyone should hear their voices, and you should have as many outlets as possible to hear their voices. They certainly didn't die for $5 a month, Mary.
No,
they didn't do it. That's not what they did. Sorry, it is. But that's my own opinion.
It's true.
But I digress.
Frank says he's looking forward to the Spengler tour. That's right. Frank is coming out from California for that. He's also looking forward to the Buster tour that night. Yeah,
John Gentile is going to be doing the Buster Colonel Darwin tour. So sign up for that. He'll be leading that himself. So we'll have a lot of fun.
That'll be interesting. Ryan said, sadly, I'm busy on July the 1st with Carney, or I'd be there. That's right. Ryan is going to be giving a talk in England, which is where he lives, on Phil Carney.
Oh, that's very, I remember he said that. That's pretty cool too. So hopefully he puts that online. If you do, Ryan's send us a link to it.
You can register for it, I think.
Because we can definitely promote that here too, so we can get as many eyeballs.
I think we have the stuff for that. I think I have the information for that somewhere in our email. And then Gentile says Buster tour leaves from Cork City, so we'll be a long run. Sorry, Gentile is going to be in Ireland.
Yeah, John's going to be away, but that's okay. We'll definitely get to that. We'll definitely go with that.
And Bill Epcorn's going to be there at Spangler with us, and so is Lisa.
Yeah, come up for that. There should be a good amount of people. Lisa Samia is going to read one of her poems at the end, which will be pretty cool about Spangler Farm, and then we'll go do some shenanigans later on. But yeah, Gatehouse will be fun. We get a lot of fun stuff to do, and there'll be a lot of other stuff we'll catch up with during that weekend as well. All right, so we'll be doing the episode on Cold Harbor this week, someday this week, whenever we get a chance to sit down and do it. That'll be fun to do, and then we'll pick a live probably next weekend, right?
Yeah. I think so. Yeah. And Ryan mentions it's online, but it's going to go up on the American Civil War Roundtable UK YouTube eventually. So it will be available after the event, which is good.
All right. So we'll promote that for you, right? Yeah. We'll get after the fact, we'll get some people to check it out. So that'll be fun. All right, Mary, any final words from you before we head off into the beautiful day? We got some shenanigans planned for us this afternoon, Mary. We got some activities planned. So we'll have some fun today.
Yeah. So thank you for everybody for being on here. And yeah, look forward to Cold Harbor this week. And then our episode after that will be General Howard after the Battle of Gettysburg, looking at his career after the Battle of Gettysburg.
Cool. All right, guys. Have a great rest of the weekend. Enjoy this lovely end of the day today for the weekend. Hopefully the weather is nice where you are. I hope the smoke is cleared, Mary. Now I can go back to the traditional Canadian haze I'm used to, not the one that we've had from the north blowing down here. So we'll have some fun with that. All right, guys. Enjoy your rest of the weekend. Have a great early of the week, and we will talk to you all on the other side. And off we go.
Yep. See you guys.